Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Lateral Phishing, Fight Phishing with Continuous Simulation and Training. I'm Amber Noble, a marketing specialist at Barracuda MSP, and I'm happy to be moderating today's session. Today, I'm joined by Jane Haggard, Program Training Manager on the Partner Success Team here at Barracuda MSP. With hands-on experience managing Barracuda campus and creating training content, Jane is essential to keeping Managed Phishline performing at its peak capability. During today's educational webinar, Jane will walk us through the constantly evolving world of spear phishing attacks and how the right combination of technology and user security training can provide critical defenses needed to protect your customers. Before we get started, some brief housekeeping. During the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to share them using the questions or chat panel to the right of the Zoom webinar screen. Throughout and at the conclusion of the webinar, you might be prompted to complete brief polling surveys. If so, please take a moment to engage with us and tell us what you think so we can continually improve the content and quality of our online events. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Jane to begin today's presentation. Take it away, Jane.
Thank you, Amber. Today, I'll be talking about new types of phishing attacks that we have discovered, take you through some account takeover scenarios, and what that means for phishing attacks. We all use email every single day, and it remains one of the most important tools to communicate in business and personal settings. With that importance, it carries a lot of risk. Because of the widespread use, hackers use email to launch attacks against both organizations and individuals. It becomes a security industry cliche that email is the #1 threat vector. Here's a recent data point from the 2018 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. 96% of data breaches start with an email, and those attacks have become more and more sophisticated over time. Only a decade ago, most attacks were around malware and spam, but now they have become a lot more targeted. Spear phishing is on the rise, and one of the attacks that we see most frequently is account takeover and phishing attacks from compromised accounts. Before we get into the details of these phishing attacks, I'd like to first take you through what an account takeover looks like. Typical account takeovers go through 4 stages. First, a hacker needs to infiltrate an organization, which is usually done through a spear phishing attack designed to retrieve login credentials to Office 365 accounts or other email accounts. Or they're buying those credentials online and using those existing passwords to get inside your organization. Once they're inside the organization, they spend quite a lot of time in reconnaissance. They're learning, they're watching, they're spending time to learn who is in the organization and if there are any other accounts to hack. And not long after, they will start launching their attacks to harvest any additional credentials and eventually seek compensation for the compromised account, asking for wire transfers or trying to steal sensitive information that they can use or sell afterwards. This is what a typical account takeover looks like, and what we will focus on during today's session with the phishing attacks that are designed to harvest credentials or monetize from those attacks. First, let's talk about different types of phishing. So, if you think about a traditional enterprise phishing attack, where you have an external hacker and you have employees within an organization, the hacker will send a phishing email, which is usually deceptive in some shape or form, using targeted content to try to trick organizations and individuals to open and interact with that email. A lot of the time, for example, they will use an email from a legitimate or high reputation account, like Gmail, to deceive the targeted individuals. We have also heard of a number of high-profile phishing attacks across the industry where it seems no organization is safe, and all those attacks have caused damage to organizations in terms of monetary or reputational damage. But what we have discovered is a new type of phishing method called lateral phishing, which is an attack that occurs from within an organization using a previously compromised account. As a result, the external hacker no longer sits externally. They're no longer outside your end user organization trying to send phishing emails into your organization. It looks a little more like this, where the attacker is able to take over an account of one of your end users and then using that account to launch lateral phishing attacks to other employees within your organization. As you can see, those email attacks are no longer crossing email gateways because they're all internal and they appear to be coming from a legitimate account where the account is being controlled by a hacker. There are lots of challenges when it comes to lateral phishing. Users and most traditional technologies expect inbound attacks from external sources rather than from within the organization. There are no spoofing or forgery signals that raise red flags. The attacks come from legitimate accounts. And more importantly, when the hacker has access to those compromised accounts, they can really customize their emails in such a way that it makes it really difficult for users to know the email is malicious. We have spent a lot of time looking at this type of attack, and we have found a few findings in our research. We're now seeing these attacks increasing exponentially. This study involves 7 months of data and included 92 different organizations with 154 hijacked or compromised accounts. And the study included 113 million employee-sent emails, which thousands were lateral phishing attacks. Exactly how widespread and successful is lateral phishing? Within this study, and since this study was conducted, we have seen that these types of attacks have become even more widespread and successful. In our research, 1 in 7 organizations has suffered from lateral phishing attacks, which means there were compromised accounts within those organizations sending phishing attacks internally. And the majority of these organizations that were affected had 2 or more attacks. Additionally, 11% of lateral phishers have been able to compromise additional accounts. If you look at normal phishing attacks that come from external sources, the success rate is typically 1%. So lateral phishing is much more successful because it's coming from one of your colleagues' legitimate emails, and there is no security system in place that is actually blocking these attacks. After reviewing the magnitude of these attacks, the next question we wanted to answer is, what do these phishing emails actually contain? There are several different tactics that the attacker uses. The first one is pretending there is a problem with the recipient's account. For example, "Dear user, we noticed an error on your account. Kindly rectify it by clicking here." This email is coming from someone in IT that would add even more credibility to it. Another type of attack we see occurring in 2 out of 3 incidents is sharing an email with an attached document where the document contains the malicious attack. "Hello, please see attached invoice and packing list, confirm and advise." The reason this one is so common is because pretty much any employee could legitimately send some kind of document. It could be someone from sales, someone from finance, someone from legal, could be their manager. It is very common to get an attachment for a document in an email. In terms of the actual content, the vast majority of these attacks can contain a fairly generic phishing email. For example, "Please view the document I sent you." Since it's coming from an internal source, it's more likely that someone would open it. 30% of these attacks contain something more contextual or specific to the organization. For example, "Hi team, Please view the updated work schedule view document. Thanks. This would be a classic thing that is sent within the company that people would click on. And finally, we found 3% of the lateral phishing attacks contain a more targeted message. For example, hi, the attached file is the specific X we use for Project Y. Please sign in securely to access the report. This is an example of a very targeted attack. In this case, the attacker actually took the time to understand what the company is working on at the time to use a targeted message. These types of attacks are generally used to target a specific person in the organization. It could be someone at a senior position or someone who deals with financial transactions or has access to sensitive documents like HR or legal. We found that actually 93% of lateral phishing incidents contain non-targeted messages, but were still very successful. And again, it's coming from a colleague, usually not being stopped by your built-in email security solution. Now, what is the level of stealth and sophistication of these lateral phishers? Interestingly enough, victims actually respond to these attacks. When receiving a lateral phishing attack, we found that 69% of hackers receive at least one non-automated reply from the victims. Could be something like, "Did you mean to send me this?" Or, "Can you tell me what this document is about?" Or, "I logged in to view it, but I don't understand why you sent it to me." And then 18% of these hackers we found will engage with the recipient, reiterating to them to click on the malicious link or attachment. Hacker will ask, "Yes, have you clicked it yet?" Or, "Is it a document about X? It's safe to open. You can view it by logging in with your email address and password." When the hacker responds, the employee is much more likely to click on the malicious link, so they will take the time to respond in order to get these valuable credentials. And finally, 19% of the more savvy hackers that respond to the victim will hide the activity from the victim by removing sent messages and replies so that the real users don't notice this unusual activity is going on. After learning about these types of attacks, how can we protect our customers from lateral phishing attacks? There are a number of challenges we need to understand. First of all, it's really hard to prevent and detect since it originates from within the organization. It's really hard for a lot of technologists, especially with email gateway technologies, to prevent hackers taking over users' accounts, since they just go to the dark web and buy logins and compromised accounts. Email gateways are really only designed to look for inbound emails that come from outside the organization. A lot of us are relying on our end users to report any emails that might have gotten through or any suspicious messages, but users will often be more trusting of an email that comes from a legitimate account that they very often do not notice or report potential attacks. When we think about how we build traditional email security, we put an email gateway between senders and our users' mailboxes. It does a really good job of blocking spam, malware, and zero-day attacks. But we have now entered this kind of email 2.0 era, where all these attacks are bypassing the gateway and are able to attack our inboxes and our end users directly. Account takeover and lateral phishing is just one of many of these threats that users face that email gateways are not designed to protect. There is also business email compromise that come from highly reputable senders that will say, "Can you wire me money?" or impersonate a CEO or another executive within the organization. Distracted emailing is another problem where users are not paying that much attention to the emails coming in. Purchase credentials to take over accounts and compromise existing accounts. We also use personal accounts interchangeably with our business accounts, and increasingly so, we might have a shared mailbox for the two, or so those personal accounts might get targeted as well in the business setting. Brand impersonation is yet another one. And then conversation hijacking, which is a type of lateral phishing. If you have a hacker that sits within the organization and watches what's going on, then at the right time inserts themselves in the conversation saying, hey, we had a change in our bank details. The wire transfer we are planning to do needs to go to a different bank. So they're stealing money that way. When you're looking at preventing lateral phishing, you need to focus on 3 areas. You need to focus on your end users, making sure that they're educated and aware of this type of attack. You need to focus on technology and invest in technology that is able to block the attackers and doesn't just sit at the gateway, but is able to have visibility into the mailbox and what's going on inside the organization. And then you need to protect the access to your email and other applications with 2-factor authentication and login monitoring. Here are some ideas on how you can improve your security awareness training. Most of you are probably simulating some of the various phishing attacks to train your users to recognize phishing attacks. It's a good idea to have them come from a compromised account so they are able to identify those types of attacks. Any kind of training that you do for them, account takeover and recognizing any signs of lateral phishing, should be part of that training as well. And then reporting and insights is always good to measure how effective that training is, so you can detect any trends or patterns and adjust your training accordingly. You also want to make sure you invest in not just your users, but also invest in your technology. And that technology you invest in has to prevent any attacks coming in. You need to be able to prevent hackers from taking over those accounts, but you also need to be able to detect any existing account takeovers in real time, as well as be able to respond to those attacks very fast. First of all, you have to make sure you have account takeover protection in place. And what that means is you are able to not only prevent account takeovers, but also monitor the communication so that technology is able to understand the context of who's talking to who within the organization. That is when suspicious emails start floating around the organization. The technology can flag those as suspicious and potential malicious emails. You also want to look at what emails are sitting in the sent inbox. There's a lot of fishy content that might be sitting in your end user's sent folders. So to look at those for any sort of exploits like identifying malicious URLs and attachments. And then look at any emails that are very targeted in their nature, but sent to an unusual recipient or group of recipients. Does this individual usually communicate with the recipient? You want to have a technology that can recognize these patterns and flag anything suspicious in real time. And finally, when something does happen, you need to be able to respond to that and understand the scope and identify all the individuals within the organization that were impacted by the attack. And you want to be sure you can respond as fast as possible, because the longer it takes you to identify the scope and respond to that, the more damage the attack can cause within the organization. Two-factor authentication is one of the best practices that we can recommend as a way to prevent account takeovers and lateral phishing, whether you're using an application or a hardware-based token. It is not bulletproof, but it really helps with this problem a lot. And then finally, another way you can monitor who exactly is accessing your email, having a technology in place that is able to monitor suspicious logins automatically and flag them. When that technology is combined with all the other areas we talked about, it can be really powerful in detecting and preventing account takeover and lateral phishing. We built our total email protection portfolio to make sure it's protecting you against a wide range of attacks, including lateral phishing attacks and account takeover. So those of you that are familiar with our portfolio, we do provide a good foundation with our gateway defense, which is Essentials. It has inbound and outbound protection with advanced threat protection built into that, with encryption and archiving. We also provide what we call a resilience layer as part of our Essentials product, which is helping you stay productive during downtime with email continuity and cloud-to-cloud backup in case of accidental or malicious loss of data. Sentinel provides the inbox defense, and this is where our account takeover protection sits. Sentinel is able to plug in directly to your Office 365 inboxes. It sees your internal communications and sees your historical communication, and it uses that data to define the context of your communication within your organization. So it understands what normal communication looks like. We talked about user awareness and security awareness training. We can support it with our managed phishing. So all of this is providing a good foundation to prevent the attacks, to detect attacks that are currently happening sitting inside your inboxes, and very quickly to respond to anything that might have gotten through. For additional information on lateral phishing, you can download the full report in this URL. Amber will paste this URL into the chat window. Also, you can complete our free email threat scan that scans your end users' Office 365 mailboxes for existing threats currently sitting in their inbox. Thank you for listening. Let's see if there's any questions out there.